Sunday night, and the subject is the spirits in prison. I don't know how long we've been on this, 5 or 6 months, or 5 months at least, on Sunday night. And I've said many times that preachers have no idea what this means, much less the ability to teach on it for 5 months. And I couldn't do that if I hadn't defined words. And when you see something repeated over and over and over again in the Scripture, go to it and learn what it means. And if you'll notice that something is said often, you know, when I was a kid and someone would put, and they'd talk about we're the light of the world, we're the light. And God brought us out of darkness. We were rebellious, living in darkness. And I couldn't quite get a handle and a hand on that. Did anybody ever have that? Were you thinking like I was when you were young? What does he mean, darkness and light? I wasn't thinking about darkness being in sin and light being in truth. But that's exactly what it is. And light and darkness has to do with the spirits in prison. I'm going to read it right here in verse 18, chapter 3 of 1 Peter. For Christ also has once suffered for sins, the just for the unjust, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but quickened by the Spirit. And this is the means by which he will preach to the spirits in prison. They put to death in the flesh, put to death. And you know, if people would find out how, if they look at this real close and see how the spirits in prison were preached to, and quickened by the Spirit. Quickened by Spirit. And this is the means, right here is the means by which Jesus preached to the spirits in prison. Preached to spirits in prison. And quickened, zoopoieo, Z-O-O-P-O-I-E-O. Zoopoieo is the word quickened, and it comes from poieo, meaning to make beautiful or make a mosaic and make something alive. Zoon, Z-O-O-N, and we say zoo or zao, meaning alive. So to make alive, being put to death and made alive, that's the means by which the spirits in prison were preached to. And of course, put to death and made alive, there's another word for both of those phrases. That would be resurrection. Resurrection would be put to death in the flesh, quickened by the Spirit, because resurrection, anastasis, means to come to life, quickened, after dying, put to death. That's what it means. Anastasis has the exact same meaning as these two phrases put together. And anastasis is feminine gender. And that is the resurrection of the church daily. We die daily. And Paul says we die daily. He dies daily. And we take our cross and die daily. And the means by which we take our cross and die daily, people say, what is a cross? And what do you do? How do you get a cross? Well, a cross, only criminals and slaves were put to death on a cross in the first century. Roman citizens could not be put to death on a cross. It was against Roman law. Roman slaves could not, a Roman could not be beaten. That's why Paul, when he was whipped by the Romans in Acts the 16th chapter, when he was put in jail at Ephesus by these guards of this prison, and then when he was beaten the next morning, they came and said, okay, we're going to let you go. He said, I'm not leaving. I'm not moving from here. They said, what do you mean you're not moving? We're letting you out of prison. He said, nope, I'm not going. I am a Roman citizen, and you beat me yesterday. They went, oh, God, what have we done? Oh, man, it scared him to death. Of course, he was pulling their leg. He got up and left, you know. But he was saying, I'm staying here till this is rectified. You know, sometimes you need to kind of use a little bit tongue-in-cheek with people. Do like Paul did. I ain't quitting. I ain't walking out until you are dealt with. Well, of course, he finally left. And so, well, I don't know how that got me there. I said something. But anyway, put to death in the flesh, quickened by the Spirit, resurrection. And I keep saying this. We preach to one person. You know, Stan came up to me and said last week, he said, when you showed that that swamp. He said that really did it for me. And I was talking about, but I'll put it like this. Instead of X's, you got all these goats. You got all these goats all over the place out here. Goats, goats, goats. More goats than sheep. And once in a while you got a sheep here. The sheep over here. Goats, 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 goats. And goats and goats and goats. And a little sheep over here. And you go and preach this goat, and he says, I hate that predestination. I hate that thing that you do, and you're a cult, and he crucifies you, and you leave, and he puts you to death, and you go over here and preach to this other goat. And he does the same thing, and he hates it, and you go preach to this goat. And he hates you for it, you preach to this goat. And he hates you, and you preach to this goat. And he hates you and puts you to death, and you resurrect and go preach to this goat. And then you leave that goat and you go to this sheep. He says, oh, I believe that. So what we're doing is we're being put to death in the flesh. This is the means by which we're preaching to the sheep, particularly to the Gentile church. We're looking for them and nobody else. And then we preach to them, and then we leave them. And look, and when you find that one person that really believes the truth, a lot of times when somebody gives you every excuse in the world, say, you're a cult, there's something wrong with you, I don't like you, you can't come to our family unions, you really need to get your heart right with God, you're preaching that predestination stuff, you may be going to hell one day. And people tell me that from time to time. And they put you to death, and you go to this one, you go to this one, and then this one, this one. You resurrect daily as you're put to death, and this one, and this one, and this one. Then you hit another sheep, and then you go to about 50 or 100 or 1,000 more goats before you get to another sheep. You get to another sheep over here. And what we're doing is wading through all of these goats, this swamp of goats, to get to God's flock. That's all we're looking for. That's why, quit arguing with people that want to argue. They're either stubborn sheep or they're goats, they're vessels of wrath, and you're not supposed to convince even a rebellious sheep. Leave them alone after the second admonition. I'm looking for sheep, nobody else. This is God's predestinated elect family. So that's what we're looking for. We're looking for sheep. And the means by which God will preach to these sheep is when we resurrect daily. We're put to death in the flesh by one goat, by another goat. We keep resurrecting till we get to a sheep. That's what this is talking about right here. How simple can it be put? Can you see that? It's not simply by Christ's resurrection. It's by us resurrecting daily. If he doesn't preach through us, how's the sheep going to hear? They're not going to hear, are they? They're not going to hear at all. And of course, the spirit's in prison. Prison phulake. Phulake means the division. It's an idea of it's more of a concept in Scripture than anything else. I really appreciate Mr. Strong putting down, it's a guarding as though you're guarding a day and night, or a light and darkness. And all through Scripture, Paul will continue to say, we were servants of sin, now we're servants of Christ. And the word servant is the word doulos. And it means to be, it's a word that means slave, or one who is enslaved. And when we're slaves, we're in a type of prison, and what binds us as slaves to sin is the desire for sin itself. What keeps us in sin is the desire for it. The more of the juices you got running through your body, and the younger you are, and the more hormones are flying through your body about 500 miles an hour, the more it's not just for sexual desires. It can be for a car and houses and things and stuff, and what I want, and I got to climb the ladder of success. All those juices are running. You want what you want, and you want to live in darkness because that's flesh. That's flesh, and day is spirit. And that's the way it's equated all through the Scriptures. And we know that the spirit's in prison. This was the Gentiles. Israel went after idols. They went after Baal and the Grover, the Christ mass system. And for 4,000 years, the Gentiles from Adam until Jesus were in darkness. And I'm going to say it again. I hate to have to repeat myself, but inevitably somebody will be watching TV. So it was more than 4,000 years ago there were civilizations. God didn't count every generation all through the Old Testament. The way He counts time, it was 4,000 years biblically. We're not talking about if He counted all the generations, how long it would be. And we don't know how far back it was to the beginning, much less Adam. So, for 4,000 years, the Gentiles were in darkness. In darkness. And they had no light. And because Israel, for a 500-year period, while they were a nation under kings, from 1 Samuel to 2 Chronicles, they never kept their sabbatical years. They went after Baal in the grove, which was Hercules and Venus, and Hercules' birthday was December the 25th. And they went after all of this. God says, I'm going to pour out of my Spirit on all flesh. And that's the Gentiles, the red, yellow, white, black, and brown flesh, for the last 2,000 years or for the last days. The spirits in prison was the Gentiles in darkness in the Old Testament, and now Paul said, I'm a missionary to the Gentiles. I'm going to give you two verses, and I'm going to cover some verses in the Old Testament. You know, I used to think, well, everybody can look up these verses, but I don't believe you will. Don't mean that as an insult. I just don't believe a lot of people have time to look up everything that I've got time to look up.
I'll look them up.
Okay, go ahead. Not right now. What I'm saying, sometimes when I get very, very elementary, it's so I can just lay it out to you. Say, here it is, 2 plus 2 is 4. Can you see that? I don't mean that as an insult. I just believe that our minds are on so many things, it's really hard to get very elementary in our thinking. Sometimes I'm doing that, and I'm not doing that as a put down. I believe with our minds on so many things in our society that if I'll just lay it down there simple, you'll be able to see it. And there's two verses, one in the Old Testament, one in the New, that in this Spirits in Prison series, there are two springboard verses. I always use verses as springboards. There are two verses that verify one another, one in the New Testament, one in the Old. And let's look at them one more time. Acts the 26th chapter. You say, why do you just do this all the time? What I believe these two verses are, they are a foundation. They're foundation verses for the concept of the spirits in prison. The spirits in prison being the Gentiles, or having been in darkness, and now God's going to bring them to the light. If this doesn't say it, I don't know what does. Here in Acts, the 26th chapter, this is as plain as the nose on your face. Paul is talking to Agrippa, the Herod at that time, and he's relating his Damascus Road experience, and he tells about his encounter with Christ, and by Jesus coming to him and saying, I'm Jesus whom thou persecutest, in verse 15, but rise and stand upon thy feet. I have appeared unto thee for this purpose, to make thee a minister and a witness, both of these things which thou hast seen, and of those things in the which I will appear unto thee, delivering thee from the people and from the Gentiles, unto whom now I send thee. And Paul says in Galatians, the 2nd chapter, in fact, I'll look at it real quick and just read the verse to you, but I'm not through this. He says, I'm sending you